My name is Chrissy, and I'm a humanist who loves thinking about narrative and its power.
I'm Bill. I'm a scientist and algorithm jock. And I've been thinking about how humans are kind of like computers and computers are kind of like humans for a long time now. I even got paid for it sometimes. And we're going to be talking about Westworld.
And we're both very interested in Westworld because it very clearly poses the question, what does it mean to be human? And so this video is the first in a series of videos where we are going to be responding to the episodes. So in this video, we're going to be responding to episodes 1 and 2. And we'll begin by talking about the 3 things that each of us found really important, worth remembering in these 2 episodes. So Bill, tell me about your 3 things.
It's nothing like the Westworld that I saw as a kid when Yul Brynner first came out. That was like the Terminator, just bad robots killing people. But this is much more nuanced. It's more about the robots than about the people. So, for example, the question that this character in the second episode comes up with, what it really asks is, who are you? Well, it turns out that the people don't seem to be learning much about who they are. They just seem, so far, running around killing each other. Whereas, it's the androids who are wondering who they are. That's sort of the mystery. They're the ones who spend the cognitive time on that. The second interesting feature of this episode is that software has a memory. Their business plan is that they can wipe the memory from each one of these robots fresh. But in fact, even things like their error correction abilities and their ability to talk to each other is reviving old memories which aren't completely wiped out. And that's clearly got plot implications, but also implications for what we are as thinking creatures. And the third is related to that. It's what is dreaming about? You know, the people don't seem to have dreams really, but the robots are having dreams and flashbacks all the time. And those are the ones that are really driving the story and driving the question of what's going to happen and what are they as creatures.
Yeah, well that dovetails very closely to the things that I really noticed and, you know, want to keep at the forefront of my imagination as I'm watching the rest of the series. So the first one, you know, so I'm a humanist, but my training is in narrative theory, so of course one of the things that attracts me to Westworld is that it's a meditation on what happens when a narrative artist gets to use the 3D world as their material. And so in the show, we've got this technology that allows characters to take on, you know, almost flesh and blood status, with profound implications that I think, Bill, like what you are interested in, you know, that's like right there in the meat of that question. Like what happens when a character is about as close to flesh and blood as you can get? You know, what happens when a character might as well be a human? So for me, that's the first thing. Then just as a narrative theorist and humanist who's very much interested in equality and social justice, I can't help but notice all the echoes in these 2 episodes, the visual echoes to The Searchers. And
you mean the movie, the famous John Wayne movie.
The famous John Wayne movie. And I don't want to get too distracted with my reading of The Searchers right now, but I have a feeling, based on how prominent those echoes were, that The Searchers is going to be a very important intertext in this film, as important as the original Westworld. So that's the second thing. Then the 2 things for me converge in one of the key premises of the show, which is the idea that thoughts are contagious, that thoughts are like viruses. And so the thoughts are propagating through the android community in this show. And going back to, you know, your concerns, to me, I think that prompts us, humans, to think about the ways in which we're programmed, to think about the ways in which contagious thoughts are infecting us.
Mhm.
So those are my 3 things.
Yeah. That last point is very close to things I've been thinking of, because when they're talking about robots having cognition which is broken, they're mixing the software and the human. Cognition as a software project, they're asking the robots, what build are you? Erase your last build, save this state, memory updates, and so forth. So they're explicitly talking about how robots are being programmed and now how they're communicating, which of course is close enough to how we live and grow up and learn that we can identify with the robot somehow. So now they're making software constructions which feel human. And in fact, the entire thing is sort of like a Turing test. The original Turing test, the computer types at a thing and you have to figure out whether these typewritten letters are from a person or from a computer. Well, here it's actually living flesh and blood. You can't even tell if it's a computer because when you're staring it in the face or when you're touching it. And they make that point. If you can't tell, what does it matter?
Yes, and then I think it's quite, it's grim to say the least, and we can probably say more, that the Turing test is, administered via a gun. How do you tell the difference between the computer and the machine? You kill the computer.
Right, and until the viewer sees who dies and who doesn't, we actually don't know.
We don't know.
And I'm afraid that might just be a trend for the rest of the film until we get some sort of magic mark or something to be able to tell who's who.
Yeah, but back to what you were saying, I think that the idea of the builds, the idea of the reverie is the upgrade that turns this otherwise kind of boring world, from the perspective of narrative theory, like this is a world where people who have enough money can pay and do whatever they want. Like we can't really make a story about that really. But then you add this software upgrade that they're calling the reverie, which is what then is allowing the past to enter into the world of these androids, which is what then changes everything. And so now we've entered the world of the narratable, now we've entered the world of story, now something happens, it's worth watching. And the other little aspect is almost a throwaway point. One of the technicians says, why do they talk to each other? And, the answer is so they can error correct.
The thing which that strikes me is they're bringing in the difficulties of software development. It's, in normal TV movie land, software is software, and you program the computer and it goes. And so the original Isaac Asimov, iRobot, got into all these debates about what does it mean that a robot is programmed to save itself instead of a person and all this sort of stuff, as if it was easy to tell. Yeah. But Asimov wrote that before software existed as a thing. And now that we've had 4 or 5 decades of actually building software and realizing what utter crap it is and how difficult it is and how tangled and buggy and recalcitrant it is. Software is like a bunch of toddler cats or something. It never does what you want. And so in this case, it's Michael Crichton did this in every single one of his books, save maybe the Andromeda Strain, about how software bugs and defects and so forth and human failure to oversee can lead to all sorts of accumulating catastrophe. Right. But this is a wonderful one. They're calling it builds. They're calling it software.
That reminds me of one of the things that's clearly going to go wrong. We can see the texts have these command lines. So the ones that stuck out for me, step into analysis, resuming, turn off your event log, confirm. And then we have that the nightmares are planted as a failsafe. So clearly the failsafe doesn't work, we can see. And the command lines in this episode 2, absolutely, they plant some ambiguity, like do these command lines work? We already see that Thandie Newton's character can override the direction to go to sleep mode. So the little poor tech who's upset because she's like running around with her little stabby thing, I can't remember what it was. Yeah. She's like, and he says, I swear I put her to sleep. Well, from what we know as viewers, he did, and we saw her wake herself up. 3, 2, 1, the magic words that she tells to the newest of the prostitutes added to the saloon. So that is a thought that's going to spread like a virus. Absolutely.
So this is coming in, bringing out one of the questions which I hope will show up more in the software land is the role of autonomy.
Yes.
Because on the one hand, a programmer or a software engineer designs a machine to do exactly what you tell it to do. But on the other hand, it's really difficult to configure every single tiny detail of that thing. So you typically program into it some ability to sort of set some of its own parameters. But now they're running into the conflict where on the one hand, they make them capable of memory, but on the other, they tell it, shut down and forget everything.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a conflict. Which of those two things wins? Or they say, turn yourself off and don't wake up, but here's how to wake yourself up. So they're already imposing ambiguities in the software programs. And as every single writer about robots has ever said, as soon as you introduce contradictory diktats into a program, anything can happen.
Now, I wonder, though, about the wake yourself up. I get the impression from episode 2 that it's not 3, 2, 1 may be how the techs walk a robot out of sleep mode, and that somehow she's been able to retrieve the command line and use it on herself. And so that's what I'm thinking is going to be the power that the androids acquire, is this ability to use the command lines on themselves, possibly also on each other.
Yeah, I can't go that deep.
Yeah, which is not necessarily like contradictory programming. It's like a way of, well, I mean, you know, they're supposed to, I mean, I'm guessing the premise is they're getting this capacity that no programmer ever imagined.
It's worth noticing that we're coming to similar conclusions from completely opposite points of view. I think you're coming to it from a narrative point of view. What is the narrative arc? What do the viewers expect? How to surprise them and so forth.
Exactly.
And I'm just looking at it. This is what software demands. This is how software works. This is how information flows back and forth. So I wasn't thinking about narrative trajectory at all. I'm just like, that's the nature of the beast they're dealing with.
That's interesting. Yeah, I'm going basically on just when certain things are introduced, then how do they get used in future storylines? And to me, this is what's so great about watching a show like Westworld, which has to be, it's a meta-narrative, because it's a narrative that's about narrative. And so we're watching a 2D narrative that's about 3D narrative. And one of the things that I just love about Westworld as a narrative, you know, a constraint they have, is that the programmers, this like to translate narrative from the two-dimensional realm of the page or the film, you know, television image, to experience. These storylines are pre-programmed for the host, but there has to be some give in the storylines. And what that give in 3D represents is the between the lines of interpretation in 2D narrative. That's what I think. And we'll see how well HBO plays with that. But as a narrative theorist, that's absolutely the only thing that it can be.
And that's the theoretical underpinning for why they have to leave the androids with autonomy. There's no way they could script every single guest interaction. And because the guests have the autonomy to move around and make reasonably random choices and, honest to God, just shoot people or stab them in the hand because they feel like it. Because of that, the androids need to be able to respond with their own degree of flexibility. So they've set up a story world in which the robots have to have autonomy. They couldn't do their job unless they have some of the freedom and some of the decision-making processes which humans have. They're now incentivized to have more and more of the subtlety in decision-making, as Anthony Hopkins said, to make them more realistic and more appealing. So that, what you call données, that beginning, that big bang of the narrative rolling, starting to roll down the hill, involves androids which are becoming ever more human. And so in this sort of slavish subjugation, it's almost inevitable they're going to start learning things and learning to protect themselves.
Right, yeah, the données, the givens of the narrative world. Like, what do we start with? What is this world saying? This is what's true. So, you know, to me, the most salient donnée in this one is the fact that in the beginning, before we enter the the realm of the narratable before like the series actually gets like its engines running. The beginning is that the droids are programmed not to have any desire to kill a living thing.
Oh, yeah.
So in episode 1, we see the droids and the flies. The flies are on their face.
Crawling on their eyeball.
Yeah. And at first you think, ew, they're doing that because they're not human. They can't feel these yucky flies vomiting on their skin, as Calvin would say. But sure. Fine, that's part of the signification there. But the more important part of the signification is that means that they are obeying the original programming. When I think her name is Dolores, and it's going to take me a few episodes to get everybody's name straight. So I'm going to be calling Anthony Hopkins and Thandie Newton for a while. But I believe her name's Dolores, our protagonist, or the most favored of the protagonist, because it's clearly a multi-plot structure. Dolores swats the fly. I think it's right here. Swats the fly at the end of episode 1. So she's clearly not constrained by her programming anymore. And I loved how they conveyed that information. I thought it was nice that we didn't have to see the text sitting around having some like earnest conversation about it, which would have been lame. They just signified it like that.
That was beautiful. The whole thing about swatting flies, which we saw as a creepiness, and only in the last minute was androids will not kill other living things. And in about a minute, they showed the woman slapping a fly dead. The only time in the entire episode, and that was the closing frame. So it's absolutely clear androids are capable of killing living things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So clearly, that's what we'll be seeing, and from the scenes to come, they seemed to emphasize violence. So I think that is absolutely what we'll see. And from what Bill has told me about the original movie, that's what the androids are doing, killing people. So they'll be killing people. But what does that mean? How does that relate back to the question of what it means to be human? How does it relate back to one of my key questions of what happens when narrative art enters into space-time, into 4D? And, what would you want to close with your question?
I think the question is there any important way in which we are different from program processors?
Nice.
They're showing people as being rather shallow, and they're showing androids as being rather deep. The two are going to cross pretty soon.
Yeah, I think absolutely. And I think another way to phrase what does it mean to be human is to ask, what can humans do that computers can't do? And to ask it that way, I think, sort of pulls us away from Westworld right now, because at least in episodes 1 and 2, it would ask it the other way. What, can computers do everything that humans can do? But I think as humans, we need to remember what we can do.
In the outside world of science, there is no computational system and no robot which is anywhere in the same galaxy as a human being.
Right.
So all of this stuff on film is pretty much made up. But it's made up around the right questions because, in fact, we are computational processors. We are made of neurons and chemicals and information flow back and forth. So in that sense, we are some kind of computer. And this is a really good way of exploring whether there's really anything that special about us.
Mm-hmm. And I think there is.
Well, there's something special about us anyway, and our live viewers, but if there are any androids watching, forget it, just erase your memory, and catch us on the next episode.
Bye. Thank you.
Cheers.